Hi, thank you for joining us as we continue the activities of Scholastic Journalism Week by amplifying voices, encouraging and empowering student journalists to tell the stories most important to them, their communities, free from censorship. Today's discussion will focus on how scholastic journalists and their advisors can unmute themselves with a brief history and overview of New Voices legislation. I'm your host, Shannon Wolf, and my colleague, Adriana Chavira, the advisor at Daniel Pearl Magnet High School in Los Angeles, will act as tonight's moderator. Panel, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
I can start. I'm Allison Cedarbaum. I'm currently a freshman at Tufts University in Massachusetts, but I did graduate from Hunterdon Central Regional High School last year, which is in New Jersey, and I served as one of the political youth advocates for New Jersey New Voices.
I'm Katie Temple. I am a senior at Columbia University in New York City, but I am a born and raised New Jersey resident. So that is also the campaign that I had the pleasure of working on. And I also got to serve as an intern with the Student Press Law Center and work on other New Voices campaigns across the country, which was fantastic.
I'm Ada Gray. I'm from Corning, New York, and I'm a junior at Corning Painted Post High School. I'm also a co-editor-in-chief of Tesserae Yearbook, and I'm a member of New Voices New York.
Hi, I'm Sarah Fajardo. I'm currently a freshman at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, but I graduated from Governor Livingston High School in Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. While I was in high school, I was editor-in-chief of our newspaper, The Highlander, and I also worked on New Jersey New Voices with Allison, and I'm still working with the Student Press Law Center on New Voices legislation today, so really good stuff.
All right, thank you, and that's great. And so we have a great amount of knowledge here about New Voices. And so I'm in California, and so we don't need a New Voices legislation here because luckily we have been protected here, or our students have a lot of protection, First Amendment. But so for those of you who maybe are not familiar with what New Voices is, I'm going to give you just a brief synopsis of some of the work that these students are doing. So hopefully some of you have heard of, or all of you have heard of Hazelwood versus Kallmeyer Supreme Court case from the late 80s. And that gave school administrators the authority to pretty much decide what can be published and what cannot. That definitely involved a lot of censorship, or can create a lot of censorship. So sometime after that, 15 states, including California, adopted legislation to give their student journalists First Amendment rights. But that left a lot of the states without protection for their student journalists. And so in the past few years, we've seen a new movement, a grassroots movement that's been student-led. And so we have some of the student leaders here who've been working on that. And so the emergence of New Voices, which is it's being also helped by the Student Press Law Center, which hopefully all of you are familiar with. And if you're not, you definitely need to have their number on your phones. And so in 2021, New Jersey became the 15th state to adopt New Voices law. And we have one student here who was instrumental in that. And as of January 2022, New Voices legislation is underway in more states, including New York. And we do have one of our panelists who is currently involved in that. And so now we're going to get started with some of our questions to the panelists. So can one of you maybe tell us why New Voices is needed, or why is it so important? Because for me, like my students, they're not giving too much thought to it because they already, have that First Amendment right.
I can go ahead and start with this one. Yeah, of course. So basically, as you said, your students are able to be protected in California, which is so awesome. But in states where they're not protected under New Voices, they actually don't have their First Amendment right that professional journalists would have. So oftentimes school administration, school boards, teachers, parents, whoever it may be, can express concern over an article and shut it down, not allow that article to be posted, which just isn't fair. And it's not journalism, in my opinion, and I'm sure everyone here, if you're not able to publish the story that you wanted to. Additionally, the New Voices legislation also protects teachers. So some advisors may be super supportive of the students and super supportive of true journalism, but they could also be potentially in trouble with the school board or school administration. So I think it's just super important that we have this legislation in every state so that students and advisors can also have their First Amendment rights.
Okay. So have you experienced censorship in previous years on your campuses? Can anyone give us maybe some examples?
Yeah, so I actually personally am not a student journalist. I was more on like the political advocacy side of things, but at my school, I did experience, actually before I was even in the school, my sister, Alana Cedarbaum, she was the editor-in-chief of our high school, The Lamp, of our high school's newspaper, rather, The Lamp. And she was trying to just publish some critiques of the administration and some of the decisions that they were making, as well as just like social justice types of articles from beyond the school matters. And a lot of them were shut down, and it was really slowing down the process. They had initially started out as weekly publications, and because of the prior review process that the school had put in place, they were forcing them to publish less because they were taking so long to do the review process that they had forced upon the student journalists. So it actually started being an issue about 10 years ago. And then when I was in high school, one of my friends wrote an article about some of the racial issues and racist undertones to the school musical that had been selected, which our administration was not allowing her to publish. It took about a couple months for them to eventually push through that and get it published. And once it did, once the school became aware of that issue, we eventually were able to get the school musical changed to be more supportive and inclusive of students in our community. But the process was definitely very difficult and experienced a lot of issues that wouldn't have been the case under the new law that we now have.
Well, it's very eye-opening because I know a lot of those issues that you mentioned are ones that I know my students have tackled in the last, 12, 13 years I've advised them. And I know they would be upset if anything like that happened to them. So I can't imagine what you're going through. Anyone else has experienced any sort of censorship or maybe you've heard of other ones? Katie?
I think a really important aspect to note is that censorship isn't just pulling stories or being discouraged from writing something. I think a lot of us have experienced the act of self-censorship, and that really can chip away at our confidence when we have administrators or legislators telling us that we're not smart enough or educated enough or old enough to write the things that we want to write about or even do the things we want to do, like pass legislation. So I think it's really important to note that New Voices has kind of surpassed the realm of the First Amendment. And I think, to me at least, it has developed to signify a movement, not just about our First Amendment rights, but about our ability to stand up for ourselves and advocate for ourselves.
Okay, good. All right, any other examples of any sort of censorship or self-censorship? That's a very good point that you brought up.
Just going off Katie, I totally agree. For anyone who doesn't know what self-censorship is, just another reason to check out the SPLC website. I know when I first started working with the SPLC, I had no idea what self-censorship was. And then I realized, oh my God, I've been doing this the whole time I was in newspaper. And I know my peers did too. If we wanted to write something maybe controversial or about our school in a negative way, we were like, oh, but we probably shouldn't, we can't, we won't be allowed to. But in reality, under New Voices, you would be allowed to, and you probably should be allowed to anyway. And then in terms of administration censorship, I know just from working with New Voices and myself personally, there's so many. A great example I like to use is someone on my staff wanted to write about how our school lacked school spirit, and she used quotes from teachers, students, and nothing in there was unfactual or slander, libel, or anything like that. But we ultimately decided not to post it. And in hindsight, we probably should have. So that's just a great example I like to point out, which incorporates both self-censorship and administration saying, oh, maybe don't put this out there.
Interesting. All right, so what's it like to be in a state where there is very little First Amendment rights for student journalists? Because like for me, it's like my principals never come and say, oh, what are you guys working on? Or let me look at your pages, or let me look at your yearbook before you send it off to the publisher. So what's it like to be in a state like that where sometimes you have to peer review or prior review?
So I'm from New York and we're trying to get our legislation passed, but we're like very thankful at our school and our program that we don't have administrators that really check up on us a lot. They know like the integrity of our program and really trust us. So we don't have prior review, which we're very thankful for. So, but we know that that's not the case in a lot of other schools in New York State, and throughout the New Voices process, we've talked to them. And so I guess we've really realized at our school how thankful we are that we don't have prior review, and we've never really personally been censored.
I think I had a little more freedom on the college level. My journalism experience started when I was a student at Bergen Community College. And it wasn't necessarily that I had administrators telling me what I could and couldn't publish, but it kind of felt like I was always looking over my shoulder, waiting for that email of like, hey, Katie, like, can you come in and can we talk about this? And it just adds an extra step of difficulty. And again, contributes to that notion of self-censorship of like, oh, I could publish this and I should publish this because it's important, but then I'm going to have a meeting with the president or a meeting with this department or that department. And it just adds a little more stress on top of the stress that we always have as students and as student journalists.
Just touching on something that Ada said, she said that their administration understands the integrity of their program. And that's something that I think advisors, we could do to support our student journalists more, is make sure that we're really teaching the code of ethics, continuing to turn out really excellently informed and researched journalism, so that a body of work is created so that the administration doesn't have to feel like they could look over the shoulder. I'm in Georgia, not a New Voices state yet, so I understand. But Ada, you spoke very well to having a program with integrity.
Mm-hmm. And definitely teaching students what's libel, and obviously, you know, trying to avoid anything or publish anything like that. And then Katie, you mentioned also that colleges, and you know, we need to point out that New Voices is not just for high school students, but also colleges. So that's very important that, you know, this is also brought on by the college level. Very good, thank you. And so now we're gonna ask about, you know, individually what your involvement has been. And so Ada, right now you're currently working in New York or trying to get legislation passed. Can you kind of tell us what you've been doing recently to get that?
So this is like our third or fourth year trying to get this legislation passed. With COVID, it obviously came to a big halt. So this is like our first year back really big. So I'm a junior, so this is my third year, but technically kind of second, if you would say, working on this. And recently we just did a phone banking activity with myself and I think 4 other of our yearbook staffers. And we called over 40 Senate offices. We left 11 voicemails. I think we talked with like 25 office assistants and 4 legislative directors. And as a result of that, we gained 2 Senate supports, two supporters in the Senate. So that was like a really big deal for us. And just recently we met with like one of our regional superintendents, trying to just like feel out her if she had any concerns with the bill that we could like respond to, and just so we could be prepared down the road for future pushback and how to respond to that. So we're kind of setting up a lot of meetings with people around the state, trying to get them to call their senator's office, set up meetings to try to get their senators on like supporting our bill. So like a lot of meetings right now, and just a lot of phone calls and stuff like that, trying to gain support and spread the word about New Voices New York.
Okay.
Ada, what might you say to any student journalists listening who are also like you, not in a New Voices state, who just heard what you said and thought, I can't call a senator, how do you even go about doing that? What might you say to encourage them? Yeah, they can do that. How do they do that?
So honestly, when my advisor, Mr. Simmons, was like, we're going to call senator's office, I think a lot of us were like, okay. So we had prepared a script together that, you know, we didn't just read directly from a script, but talking points and like moments of things that we could respond with. We were asked questions, and then like, if you left a voicemail, here's what to say, here's what to include. So it honestly was not that bad. Mr. Simmons kept saying after the first phone call, it'll be a lot easier. And I think I ended up making 7 or 8 phone calls that day. And we just went to the senator's website, found their office phone number, called them up, and then went through our script. And depending on if we got a real person or left a voicemail. So yeah.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
Just speaking to the youth advocacy political side of things, I got involved in New Voices, not through student journalism, but through a different organization that I was part of, through the YMCA actually, that's involved in civic engagement and getting students involved in activism and advocacy. So through that program, I actually just happened to be testifying in front of the New Jersey Senate Education Committee. I had just found the bill online a couple of weeks earlier, wrote up a speech about it, and testified in front of the committee. And Thomas McHale, who was one of our adult advisors, was there. So then we sort of got in contact after that, and it snowballed from there. So I think that things like that, going and testifying or calling or sending an email, all of these things are a lot more accessible than people realize. Especially for young people. Like Katie was saying before, there does tend to just be an assumption that if you're too young, if you're not educated enough, what have you, you aren't going to be able to put your message out there. You're not going to be able to express your opinion. But we're all residents in our states, in our countries, in our communities too, and our voices deserve to be heard. They can't be heard through the electoral process until they're 18, so they should certainly be heard through other means. And I think for people who are more frequently on the writing side of things, I have never been someone who didn't want to talk. So this wasn't much of an issue for me. But I know a lot of people who have been more on the writing side of things and making that jump towards making calls and getting in the faces of these politicians who are supposed to be representing you. It's a big step. But at the end of the day, it's the exact same thing, because you're making your voice heard, you're putting that out there for the community, and especially with grassroots organizing, which is so much about collaborating with the people who are on your level to make your voice heard, which is at the end of the day what New Voices is all about. That is truly what journalism is meant to be. So at the end of the day, I think a way to sort of lessen the blow is thinking of it in those terms, whether it's through writing or advocating on a more aggressive, not aggressive, but in a more like hands-on level. There's either way, you're making your voice heard, and that's the most important thing. So whatever you're most comfortable with, just push that one next step, and you can make more of a change.
That's great advice. And so, Allison, how long did you work on New Voices or getting that legislation pushed?
Yeah, so I think when I was in the State House, that was middle of my sophomore year. So it was before COVID. So it would have been middle of 2019. And then from then until getting the bill passed and signed, which was just a couple months ago, I was in and out of meetings and email lists and all of those things. The peak of my involvement was definitely during like the heat of the pandemic. We were doing a lot of figuring out how to transition our advocacy work over to more of the phone calls and emails as opposed to in-person meetings and things like that. So one of the events that we held, or the main event that we held, was a student journalist forum. We invited state legislators, we invited members of the adult media who could spread the word. And of course, we invited student journalists from across the state to come in and share about their experiences with censorship and why New Voices was so imperative. So that, I think, is definitely a clear example of grassroots organizing that we were able to do, and just getting everyone in the same place to talk. So yeah, that was definitely when I was most involved. Yeah. So a couple years to answer your question.
You started in high school, but then you continued through college?
So I actually just recently am now in college. So definitely more of my involvement was centered around high school. Yeah, but I definitely still am keeping up with the New Voices movement. It's definitely something that transcends time.
Definitely. Thank you. And Sarah, what's been your involvement with New Voices?
Yeah, so mine was, I think I started a little bit after Allison, just trying to figure out, I feel like I now measure time with COVID, but it was right when COVID started. So I guess April 2020, and my newspaper advisor, who's the greatest advisor of all time, she emailed me and was like, the Garden State Scholastic Press Association's having a Zoom meeting about New Voices. You're going, get on the Zoom. So I was like, okay. And I got on and I realized that I was the only person, and there was maybe about 30 kids from all over New Jersey who'd experienced censorship. So then I was like, wow, I thought everyone had prior review. I thought everyone self-centered. I didn't realize, really, I had no idea that there was a problem at my school, or with myself specifically, excuse me. So then I stayed to talk to the advisor of the Garden State Scholastic Press Association, and then he referred me to the New Voices summer program. So I applied for that, was admitted, and then I started that in, I want to say, June, July 2020. And I've been working with them ever since, alongside Allison and Katie. And now currently I'm working with the Student Press Law Center with 3 other advocates from different states, which is really cool because some of us have gotten New Voices passed. 2 of the kids are one's from Texas, one's from Virginia, so they're still pushing for it. So it's really exciting to still kind of be in the thick of it. But now I'm primarily working on the social media for Student Press Law Center. Go follow. You might see some fun TikToks on there. We're experimenting. And kind of speaking with them. And I've been doing the story of myself training. So that's, if you check out the website, go to any events, there's some next week for Student Press Freedom Day. But yeah, so I'm still working with it and I love it. I think it's super exciting. And the student forum that Allison mentioned was definitely, I guess, the highlight of my involvement so far.
That's awesome because your network has gone through now various states and you've gotten to meet a lot of different people and you're helping one another. That's awesome. And so Katie, you're also, have been working with the Student Press Law Center. So what's been your involvement with the New Voices legislation?
Yeah, so I got started when I was editor-in-chief of The Torch at Bergen Community College. And that's kind of when I found out not only about the Student Press Law Center, but about New Voices legislation specifically. So I had John Tagliarini come to talk to my editorial board about the bill and about censorship problems in New Jersey. And it really just piqued my interest. And so I stayed in contact with him. I was able to testify in front of the Senate and the Assembly Education Committees, which was really exciting and also a little scary. I also participated in the student forum, which I think made all the difference because it is a lot more difficult for legislators to tell you no when you're directly in front of them, whether it be on Zoom or in person. When you're sitting there having a conversation and they're listening to you, it's really hard for them to rely on all these preconceived notions of like student capabilities and intelligence and stuff like that. So I think that made a huge difference in our efforts. And then I also interned with the SPLC as their New Voices Fellow, which was a great time because I got to work in campaigns on other states. Part of the work I did was making state information sheets. So people who wanted to get involved had one place to find all of the information about who their legislators were, how to contact them, like different steps as to where each state was in the process. That is also where I met Sarah, was during our New Voices Institute that we put on over the summer, where students not only got to work on campaigns in their own state, but also bounce ideas off of one another from other states. And I think that really helped the movement as a whole kind of come together and become more of like a nationalized movement, which was really fun for me to witness.
Okay, very good. And you mentioned the Student Press Law Center. We mentioned them several times because obviously they're very instrumental. What sort of assistance have they provided you? And also what other organizations have you worked with? I know Allison mentioned the YMCA earlier as well. So what are some other groups that maybe are also kind of working through the same, toward the same goal?
I think especially in New Jersey, the Garden State Scholastic Press Association has been really integral in helping us organize, but also kind of serving as the adult voice when people don't want to listen to students. Specifically, Tom and John have kind of been at this from the start, and they helped guide us through the movement and get us to where we were, as well as all the organizations that signed on with us, like the NJEA and the JEA and stuff like that. Principal superintendent organizations are kind of hit or miss depending on what state you're in. We experienced some pushback in New Jersey from them, but I hear that other states have had luck in gaining the support of their principals and superintendents. So that is kind of a state by state basis.
Okay, very good. And so definitely reach out to your state scholastic association. Hopefully, I guess if students don't know, what it is, hopefully their advisors do know how to contact them, and hopefully they are working toward that. All right, very good. And I think kind of Shannon already asked this, but any tips you'd give student journalists who are trying to get this legislation passed in their states or even started? For example, in Georgia, where Shannon teaches, what are some tips that maybe you can give her students or her students and her student journalists in her state?
I was lucky enough in high school that my advisor was extremely supportive and wanted to get involved. So if you go to a school where you're have that kind of relationship with your yearbook or newspaper advisor, I would definitely ask them about it, kind of get the ball rolling. We have the Garden State Scholastic Press Association in New Jersey, so I'm assuming that in other states they have local or statewide organizations as well. So reach out to them. Social media, there's a ton of accounts state by state, which is always a great place to start, especially for kids in high school because it's super accessible. And then I would say also kind of getting past the fear, because I know we talked a lot about a big part of this is public speaking, phone calls, going to forums, talking to state legislatures. And that can be super scary. I get it. Sometimes I even get nervous, like ordering takeout. I was definitely a little fearful in the beginning, but as you kind of go through the process, you see hopefully that a lot of the state legislators are actually super excited to see kids getting involved, and they're just kind of blown away by that. So maybe even if they're not on board in the beginning, you're going to establish relationships with them and you might be surprised. So I would say it's a really great experience to be able to, like, when else are you going to be able to kind of work on government proceedings in high school? So I would say just kind of telling kids about that, that might entice them to get involved.
Definitely. Yeah, just going off of what Sarah said, like you might perceive the fact that you're young to be your greatest weakness in this process. It's absolutely not. It is completely your greatest strength. Because if you send an email to a representative and you are just like the typical adult person who can express their opinions through the vote at the end of the day, and you're just sending like, I'm frustrated about taxes or something along those lines, you're less likely to get a receptive audience. But if you're young, if you're passionate, if you're well-informed, and you're talking about what you perceive to be your human and civil liberties, that's something that's going to get the attention of these representatives. No politician wants to be accused of not preserving human rights and civil rights. So putting yourself out there, in being a young person, as long as you demonstrate to them that your youth it's not going to hurt your ability to get involved, because if anything, you can dedicate the most time and the most personal experience to advocating for this issue, because it is truly your experience. It's fantastic to have adults and teachers and administrators, if you can get them, and other organizations on your side, and it certainly helps with the logistics, I won't lie. But when it comes to the person who's actually talking about it, it has to be the person who has had the personal experience, who has the personal connection to it. And that's you guys. So just making that known that, yes, you're young, but you're ready to be heard, is an incredibly important step. I'd also just say that there is a very important balance to be struck between higher level advocacy and grassroots advocacy. Having opportunities to use social media and other platforms to bring student journalists together forms that really strong base. But at the end of the day, you can't pass legislation without legislators. So trying to strike that balance once you've gotten your foot in the door is really, really helpful, and forming those connections both from the ground up and from the top down.
We just have a few moments left. I wonder if any of the panelists would like to add just their number one tip, or add something that we haven't already heard tonight, just in the final moments we have left.
Allison,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
are you sure?
Yeah.
Oh, Zoom. Allison made me think of this, but another great strength that you have is you actually are student journalists. You actually have those stories of being censored, of self-censorship, if not being censored, any story you have of being as a student journalist. So you can use that as a strength. You can post that. You can, when you speak to state legislators, say, no, actually, this happened to me. And they might be shocked. Other people might be shocked. No one knows what's going on in your high school. No one else is a high school journalist but you. So it's always super important to tell, we call it at the SPLC, your story of self, because that's a great strength that you have and that you can enable.
Something I always want to emphasize is that a lot of people are going to tell you that you can't do this, whether it be because you're a young person, because you're a young woman, because of the way you look, and all of that is incorrect. And the New Voices movement has helped me, or is what helped me realize that, because a lot of people told me that I couldn't do it. I couldn't pass a law. I couldn't be a journalist. I couldn't pursue law. I couldn't pursue politics. I couldn't do legislative advocacy. And clearly none of that is true, because here I am today after testifying in the Senate and the Assembly and going to Columbia and pursuing a law degree and doing all of these things. And so it disheartens me to know how many people are going to tell students that they can't do it, but I promise you that you can. And it doesn't matter what people think you're capable of, because you know what you're capable of. And that is the ultimate, most important thing that I could emphasize.
All right, very good. And so all of you, it's been very inspiring to listen to you and see what you, or hear what you've been working through these past few years, and the work that, you know, you're seeing your, the fruits of your labor with legislation being passed, and probably in New York, hopefully it will pass soon. But it's very inspiring, and, you know, I love that the movement is being led by students. Obviously, we have help with various organizations such as SPLC and their New Voices Institute. Hopefully, we should be seeing something hopefully soon about when applications will be for their summer institute. But definitely that's something that, you know, students should be checking out. And so Shannon, do you want to say anything else?
I think all of us should just get out there and continue using our voices and find other voices that we can amplify.
All right. And I'm going to share the Student Press Law Center website. I'm not sure. Yeah, okay. So hopefully you all can see, you can contact the SPLC at splc.org. And one of their main persons there who's behind or working with New Voices is Hillary Davis, and her email is hdavis@splc.org. And definitely they would be more than happy to help you. And check out their website as well. They have a lot of information there. So if you're not familiar with them, definitely bookmark their website and go through it. All right. So thanks for our panelists, and thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It was great.
Thank you.